Oh, good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday morning. I'm Bob Brown. I'm the one trying to adjust my camera, but never can get it quite right. And it's since it's the first Sunday of the month, it's Sunday brunch where Brenda Clough and Karen G. Anderson, KG Anderson, as the writer is known, and Phyllis Irene Radford, three of the wonderful writers, are being joined by their guests that I shall let them introduce. Okay. Because nothing I could say about Andrew is going to be as meaningful as what these folks say. But before we do that, Karen, is there any announcement you have?
Um, yes and no. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have a collection of my my dystopian and resistance stories come out, many of which have already appeared in B Cubed, but this puts them all together into one sort of cold, hard look at dystopia and bravery and resistance. And I'm really excited about it. And the book is going to be called Patty 209 15 Tales of the Very Near Future. So look in the next couple of weeks. I'll have cover and all kinds of goodies to show.
Yay!
Okay, well, I just wanted to get that out there because I got to tell you
you.
something about Ms. KG Anderson. She has a dubious honor of. Have you ever been rejected by me?
You rejected one story in favor of another one.
Yeah, I swapped the
you
story
did buy
out
the other
one
one.
time. Karen is such a fantastic writer that I mean, she ranks up there with Phyllis Irene Radford. Uh, and Brenda, I'm not as familiar with all of her work, but I've heard words used about her that says about something going on currently that's the best thing you've ever written.
She has a hot new book.
Yeah,
It
so
is coming out later this month.
I will leave you guys for the Mutual Admiration Society, but we're Andrew. You are sitting at the on the screen with some wonderful writers, and that said, um, I'm going to abandon you guys so I can go watch what goes on behind the scenes, keep the links alive, and also just say to all the people who stayed home yesterday, you shouldn't have. It was an epic day of being out and standing up for your country. Okay, that said, bye now.
I'm going to jump in and try to make a stab at introducing Andrew. One of the reasons that you get a lot of the good quality books that you get is because people go through rigorous critiquing, and one of the biggest critiquing organization that I know of is Critters, which Andrew founded like in 1995. So we decided to bring him on today so that he could talk not just about Critters that he founded, but also about critique and why it's so important to so many writers and beta reading. So, Andrew, you are coming to us from Florida or Denver?
In Florida at the moment,
Oh, very
room, you
nice.
probably see a little bit of sky out there, and yeah, no, so it's on an iPad with a weird angle view, but I'm here.
So tell
I
us
made
a
it.
little bit. I'm a very linear person. I like to know how and why things started. So tell us why you started a group called Critters and what its original incarnation looked like. Because in 1995, it can't have looked like the internet and Zoom meetings.
That was back in the Jurassic.
Yes,
Yeah.
the web just barely started.
Mhm.
Because the web, kind of started in 1993, give or take. I had well, to start linearly back in the late 80s. I had started what apparently was the first internet service provider. It's not like I started out saying I want to start the first internet service provider, but there was this thing called the internet, and I thought the only people who could get on it at the time were people in the government and research institutions, and I thought the public should be able to get on this. So I was a professor at the University of Denver in the computer science department, and I said, "Hey, we have this spare machine. Why don't we put up an internet service provider?" Which it wasn't called back then. And they said, "Well, what is that?" Had to do a lot of justifications, but we got something set up where people could use at the time their modems and dial in, and they get access to the internet. And now we call it an ISP. So I guess it was the first ISP. It's free. It was donation funded, and we got tons of interest, lots of donations. This was late 80s, 87 I think was the very beginning. That kind of rocked along, but I was kind of an early internet guy. And then I had started writing when I was, a early teenager, and got some early rejections, and they were, I got some personal ones. So I thought, well, I must be kind of on the way. But then I put it aside for a long time. And then in the 90s, kind of got back to the bug. I thought, I want to write some more science fiction. And I thought, well, it'd be really cool to get some feedback from people. And at the local convention, there was a writer's workshop that would have a 1 day session during a convention, the Northern Colorado Writers Workshop, which was started by Ed Bryant, who went to the Milford stuff with Damon Knight, and then he started a local one. And I couldn't go to those at the time, but I thought, this is a kind of thing that should be on the internet. And we can get more access to people than just, 10 people locally. And so I looked around, is there one out there on the internet? No, there wasn't anything. So I thought, well, there's this new thing called the web, which was at the time very, very new. HTML didn't even have a way to center text. It was basically
I
you
remember
could say,
that.
yeah, you could say, I have a heading. I have a heading type 1. I have a heading type 2. I have a paragraph. And the browser was supposed to
Oh,
figure out what to do with that. And so you couldn't say,
nights
I want
were
to
bold
center.
in those
Yeah,
days.
you couldn't, but you
Yeah.
could emphasize. There was the EM emphasize tag. So I thought, well, this is still a thing that people can connect to. And so I just set up an early web server as part of, well, the internet service provider was Nix, NYX. And so I just set up a website on Nix for Critters. I named it Critters. It seemed like that had to do with critiquing. The domain was available at the time, critters.org. I also picked up critique.org as nobody had it. And it's nonprofit, so I figured it's better to keep it in the .org space. And just then, the forum at the time was called Usenet News or Net News.
Yes.
So I went
Oh my
and
God.
I went and posted on there and said, "Hey, I've started this thing. Is anybody interested? Here's the website." It had an email component if you only wanted to do email, because that was, the de facto method of communication. And so it could also email manuscripts in and email them out. And then there's also a website, which is, extremely crude, basically a list of manuscripts available with links where you could download them. I had to jury rig a kind of password system because there was no such thing as passwords for websites back then.
Nobody needed them.
Well, I kind of wanted to keep just ordinary people out. The only real use of a login for Critters is just to keep out bots and random people in foreign countries who want to just gum up the works. So even today, anybody can join. And if you act badly, then you get booted out. But it's still, it's not high security. So I put up a manuscript and figured, well, what's a good way of doing this? And I figured maybe a week. I was kind of basing it on the way the Northern Colorado Writers Workshop functioned. And I had at this point joined. And so we did about 3 manuscripts a month. We'd meet monthly in person and do about 3 manuscripts. And that seemed like a reasonable workload. So I set it up to do 1 a week online with the proviso that if you want to stay current and active and have your manuscript sent out, you had to average doing 3 critiques per month. So 3 critiques per 4 weeks makes it a nice easy function to calculate. So it's basically in 75% of weeks you have to send in a critique. And then when your manuscript comes up, if you're at the 75% or above threshold, your manuscript goes out. If not, it gets held and you can catch up, or it, or it never goes out. So that encouraged people to critique.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, so otherwise you end up with, all these manuscripts and nobody's doing anything with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it forces a workload,
Mm-hmm.
and people started joining.
So how long are these manuscripts? Are people sending in full novels? Are they sending
Yeah,
in
well,
short stories?
yeah. So at first, it was a learning process way back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's
But
no
now
man.
you've got it down to a system. It's
I
like
think so. I
grease.
think so. I've learned a lot in 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So originally it would take just about anything. And then I said, well, these long, someone tried to upload a novel. You're like, well, you can't read a novel in a week and do anything reasonable with it. That's not fair to
Yeah.
try to
What are you
repeat
going to
that
do with
with.
the Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah, right. So I put an arbitrary at the time word limit and said no manuscripts longer than 20,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
It's still
Yeah.
a chunk to do in a week, but you can do it in a week.
Yeah.
It's doable. And then that was kind of the limit for a couple years, was just that. And people would send everything. We didn't have really shorts back then because the goal of Critters was to get professionally published.
Right.
And none of the major
Right.
markets really took shorts at that point.
Yeah. You
So,
really had to be about 5,000 words or so minimum.
yeah, that was kind of the goal, and
Yeah.
so most people were in that range. And then people said, "Well, I want to send my novel through," and so I was like, "Well, okay, you can send a chunk of chapters
Yeah.
each week," and that worked for a while. Have a limit. You decide, do you want to send 5,000 words or 20,000? It's up to you. You'll get less critiques at 20,000 words. And
Mm-hmm.
then people said, well, that's great, but I don't really want to wait that many weeks because you have to go to the end of the queue. There's like, a list of manuscripts, and you send a new one in, you're down here. And they said it takes forever to get a novel. So we came to the idea of creating a thing called a request for dedicated readers, where you could send through the first part of your novel, say 5,000 words, a few, chapters 1, 2, 3, whatever, and then mark it as you'd like to have dedicated readers, and they will contact you directly, and you send them your whole novel. And then at your speed and their speed, they'll read the whole thing. And then when they're done, and the key here was when they're done, the author will give them credit
Mm-hmm.
at a certain critique rate of, in this case, 1 credit per 5,000 words of the novel. So when they finish, they get a whole chunk of credit, and then they can send their manuscripts through. The readers can send it through. So that's worked very well.
Is that now what you're really concentrating on? I can tell that there's chunks of it that sort of go up and go down.
No, it's still, I think, mostly short stories.
Uh-huh.
And people put novels up as they feel like. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really monitor or do anything with it. It's first come, first serve. Whoever gets in the queue, if it's a novel or a short story,
Mm-hmm.
it goes out. Um,
How much business this Critters doing now, would you say?
well, it's actually fallen off.
Mm-hmm.
Its heyday was probably when the internet was the most popular and new and smallish, where there
Mm-hmm.
weren't any other critique groups out there. So we send out about 20,000 emails to people a week, but that doesn't mean 20,000 people participate. We peaked at, I think, about 35,000 people on the list. Um,
Wow.
That's
yeah,
a lot.
that's
It
a lot, but
is.
it
And
doesn't
even
mean
if
they're
half of them are
participating.
lurkers, or even
Yeah, well,
90% of them are
yeah,
lurkers,
yeah. At this point, it's
that's
fallen
still,
down to there's really only a small thousands of active people right now.
Mhm.
And
So, Andrew, this sounds so
yes.
civilized.
Yeah.
I have now, and what I say, I've been in a lot of groups, and I've been in a number of critique groups and workshops, and I've gone. Fortunately, most of them have involved either some training in how to do
Mhm.
critique, or some pretty articulate, strongly worded guidelines, like don't savagely rip somebody
mhm,
apart. However, I've also been to some conventions with one session critiques that got completely out of
Mhm.
control. And one participant probably destroyed
Mhm.
another writer for
Mhm.
life. I was the recipient of one and I'm pretty much undestroyable, but I still think back on it and envision myself strangling the
Mhm.
person. Um,
Mhm.
how do you prevent this?
Yeah.
How do you train people to
Useful.
give really powerful but not
Yeah,
damaging
well, this
critique.
was well, I knew Harlan Ellison, and
You see,
and
everybody who knows
I
just
like Harlan.
yeah. So
Yeah.
when you talk about critiques that were ripping new air holes in people, I actually it wasn't so much Harlan, but his attitude that other people followed in the group.
Mhm.
And what I got was feedback because you email me and you say, hey, I didn't like this or what's going on because one of the things is give me feedback how this is working for you. And so the early feedback was 99% people complaining about overly harsh critiques
Hmm.
and that it was, they felt they learned nothing from it, and it was just, "Arr," and they wanted to quit and so forth. So I realized this is a problem that I had to address somehow. So I started looking at the critiques that people liked and said, this was a great critique. And I looked at the critiques that people didn't like. And it's 30 years ago, but in a few, over the course of a few years, a few small years, I figured out it feels like it was kind of an AI analysis at the time, but there was no AI. It was just me looking at these things, but doing the same kind of thing. Is what are the commonalities among the things that work for people, and what are the commonalities of things that get hate complaints emailed to me, and I want to minimize my work.
Very good.
I had a physics professor once, and he said, "I believe in conservation of energy, mine." So so I took that to heart. And like, how can I reduce all these complaints to me,
Mhm.
and also make it a better experience for people getting critiqued? So I
Yeah.
realized there's certain phrasing patterns that people use when they're writing critiques that people didn't like. And so I started kind of just keeping notes on, I'd ask people, what didn't you like about it? And there turned out there was a very common pattern of phrasings that really irritated people. And I kind of just, I guess, realized, I don't know, I don't have any psychology background, but it seemed to me what it did is that these phrasing activated their lizard brain, and they A, got very angry, and
Mhm.
B, more importantly, they didn't hear what the person said. So the person may have had a valid complaint or critique
Mhm.
or comment, but the way they phrased it just turned off the recipient.
This is
So
very
I
important knowledge.
Can I make a guess on
Example.
can
yeah,
I make a guess on one of these phrases?
go for it.
My guess is the phrase was, well, what you need to do
And
is.
that's exactly a typical thing. So
Hmm.
I started categorizing these. I could look at the phrases, and the vast bulk of them are in what I call it teacher voice or expert voice
Mhm.
or some kind of authoritative statement, even a statement of fact. It's simple as saying something like "you need to blah blah blah," or readers want to see blah blah blah. And
Mhm.
so, speaking on behalf of all readers, speaking as if you're an expert, speaking as if you're a teacher or a parent, any use of the imperative voice. So like, well, what does work? And what did work for people that they said, oh, this is a great critique, and I learned a lot from this, was using personal reactions and I statements. And so you can, for example, if you might say, let's see, one that wouldn't work would be your main character needs to wear a red hat, something like that. And so, maybe it's valid critique. Maybe there's a reason that, in the rest of the story, the red hat's very important, but saying your character has to wear a red hat would activate the lizard brain. They say, well, I don't think why are you telling me he has to do that? Whereas if you say, I feel it would be better if your character wore a red hat. So it's the
Yes.
same comment, the same critique, the same, here's a problem for me as a reader,
Mhm.
but phrased as my personal reaction is, I feel that, or even though I think that.
Yeah.
So I compiled a list of phrasing,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then if
I had one once where I was trading critiques with a now fairly famous author. And I just said, in my books, I prefer that my hero discovers the answer to the problem rather than stumbles across it.
Mhm.
They work for it.
Yeah, and but that's the way I prefer it. I don't know if that's what she wanted or not, but she now uses that phrase in
Mhm.
helping
Mhm.
other people through problems.
Good.
And over in
That's
the
exactly
comments,
it.
Liam Westcott says talking down to people or talking at people instead of engaging them.
Very
Mhm.
true.
Mhm.
And I agree very much
Yeah.
with
And
that.
this
You
is
have
also
you have
what
no
they do.
authority.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Have
they
a
do this in
critiquer.
like psychology and therapy too. You know, they tell you, don't tell your spouse, I can't stand how you cook. Instead, you can say, but darling, I feel that undercooked chicken is not a good thing. And
Yeah,
it
for
don't, it
me.
doesn't
Yeah,
get,
personal reaction.
yeah,
Mhm.
you want to, it's because it affects me. It's not a flaw in you. Just cook it some more.
Yeah.
I'm in a critique group with someone who uses the questioning
Mhm.
technique where he said, I wondered what would have happened if you had
Mhm.
done this. I wondered what would have happened if this character had come into the
Mhm.
scene a little bit earlier to explain the
Mhm.
stuff. And I find that that is incredibly
Mhm.
opening up of
Yeah.
possibility. I react really well to the
And
questioning
that's just
approach.
exactly because it's an I personal reaction.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
wonder if
Yeah.
something
And
that
Rather
fits
than
in.
you are having a problem.
yeah.
Exactly.
Cheryl Alexander says using the phrase, have you thought of?
Mhm.
And then Charles Smar says, I love hard SF. Basic science errors trigger me. I often add, other than that, it is a good read.
Yeah.
Whether,
Well,
yes, Bob does that to me because I stray into realms that I know nothing about, and he does.
There is definitely, I'm involved with a couple of, actually, one really major workshop, and they have deliberately, after years and years of using the Harlan Ellison approach, or at least allowing it, they now really have changed their approach, and they start the critique by having the author say, I am particularly looking for feedback about
Mhm.
X. How do people feel about that? And sort of urging people to address
Mhm.
that, because you can address other. They also ask that when you start a critique, that you say something about what you liked and then go on to what you had difficulty with, so that the person is at least starting with a framework of what was valuable about their piece, rather than
Immediately kicking it in the slats.
Yeah.
because I've seen people starting. I had a problem with. And
Exactly.
another part of the kind critique has also been the, I don't read a lot of
Mhm.
X, so I may not understand what you're doing here. And then you can
Mhm.
say
Mhm.
fairly frank
Exactly.
stuff.
Yeah. I was in
I
a,
ended up putting
yeah.
this into a list.
Oh, good.
And so
Yeah.
I've,
People
I've
like
over
lists.
30 years, I think I've written, 3, 4, 5 articles about it. And I call it diplomatic phrasing. So
Mhm.
Where can people find one of your sort of manifestos about diplomatic
well,
phrasing?
it
Is it
is.
on
It is
critters.org?
absolutely. It's on the Critters, and then there's a list of resources and
Good.
the
And the URL
permission.
is around someplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Bob
was
posted it
gonna
just,
post that. It's
Good.
a
Good. Good.
number of
Good.
comments
critters.org.
down.
It's easy. It's critters.org. It's really easy to
Right.
get to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was actually a lifesaver for me,
Mhm.
time-wise,
Oh,
because then
yeah.
Mike actually made it a rule. It is the one of the only rules in Critters. There's 2 rules. One, you have to critique in order to get critiqued and do this 3 a month average. And
Mhm.
second is you have to use diplomatic phrasing.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I just pull my hair out because I'm dealing with always angry people. So I've written several articles about it. It's basically, it's not, I call it, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Mhm.
And that has been fundamental, I think, to the success, because then people hear in a way their brain can process. It's not 100%. People,
Mhm.
hear things differently, but it's reduced the number of complaints down to where I get maybe one of these a year where
I
someone
love it.
emails me about it.
I
Mhm.
love it.
I also put in a rating system in the critiques and
Mhm.
ask the author to rate them and give me any problems, and sometimes they'll say, yeah, diplomacy was a little light. So I would then go look at that and talk to the critiquer and say, maybe you want to refresh reading the various diplomatic phrasing articles. And maybe once every 5 years, I've banned someone who absolutely can never get the hang of it.
Mhm.
And they're like, well, I want to be
I want
blunt. And it's like, well, you can be blunt, but you're not going to
Be
get through it.
nice.
Yeah, you have to write for your audience, and the audience
I
is
want
the
to
is their
ask you,
author.
Exactly.
is the, is there a way that people who are writing edgy stuff, um, we were talking, about characters that die, or scary stuff, or politically upsetting stuff. Is there like a bin where they can put their stuff to be critiqued so that um,
Offset.
they don't chance really freaking somebody else out?
Well, two ways. One is you can always put comments at the top of your manuscript, and there's even a special box when you submit a manuscript. You can put comments to the reader, and you can say, "Here's what I'm looking for," or "Here's some warnings," and it depends, what nature it is. For purely adult material, since we have had the youngest I'm aware of we ever had was someone who was 11 years old. So, you get anyone in the minor category. So we created an adult section. And that was actually part of, I created like 16 different workshops. Critters started with science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And then people said, well, I want to do, mainstream literature, or I want to do Westerns or whatever. So we created a whole bunch of different workshops. And one of those was adult only material, where you're not supposed to join unless you're actually an adult, and you can put it in there.
And you're talking about erotica here, or you're talking about like
Yeah.
blood and guts?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, erotica. Anything that minors should not read gets put over there. And you can also mark a manuscript and say this has some really intense stuff that readers shouldn't see. So ask me, and I will send you the manuscript. And so, there is a mechanism for doing that if you really feel that minors shouldn't be seeing it, even though it's science fiction, but like, erotica science fiction, you want to send it through the science fiction workshop, then you'd mark it in like the request for dedicated readers. They contact you, you make sure they're, not a minor, and then you can send them your manuscript. But other than that, the kind of cutoff is if it could appear in Asimov's or FNSF or Analog, then it's fair game. Yeah, if you don't think they would publish it, then don't send it out to everybody at once. Kind of limit who gets to see it.
Yeah. Now I've been in critique groups where we had a strict policy of auditioning new members, and mostly it worked out great. But occasionally you get someone who is overwhelmed. That's the politest thing I can say. And the only way they feel they can make their stuff look good is to make yours look worse. They don't last very long in a critique group. But how do you guys handle it?
It's basically organic through the diplomacy rules, really. That if they don't critique, they'll never get their material critiqued. That's enforced by software. It's this little database, looks up your points, and your stuff doesn't get sent out to anybody. 99% of Critters is automated, because that's my background. So I try to automate everything, and then the real mechanism, what you're talking about, is when people complain to me. Well, I promote the diplomacy phrasing. It's plastered all over the place when you join, and if you stray from that, it'll quickly come to my attention one way or another. So if someone comes in there and they really are just trying to tear people's work apart, they have to do it in a diplomatic way.
Yeah.
And the people you're talking about typically are not really the ones who like to write that way, because when you try to tear someone apart with a bunch of "I feel" statements, it doesn't have much impact the way you're thinking. You're not really tearing them down. You're saying, well, I feel this person, should wear a red hat, or I feel you should use third person omniscient. Like, okay, It's
That's how you feel.
but if you were to come out there and say, the only things that ever sell are third person omniscient, and you must use that, then
Yeah.
that comes to my attention very quickly, and they get a talking to, and it happens very rarely at this point. I also have software that tries to detect it and kind of alerts people up
And
front. So it really doesn't happen much.
don't the actual critiquers also get rated? And so if you consistently are nasty, don't get a very high rating as a critiquer?
Yeah, well, not really. I put a rating system in because
Mhm.
people said, you ought to rate people.
Mhm.
And then at the end of each manuscript, you can send me a comment on, there's two things. One is how in depth was the critique.
Mhm.
This is one of the other guidelines, is that the target is about 500 words of critique material, not including quotage
Mhm.
and not including boilerplate. So boilerplate's not really allowed. You say, here's my list of things I like. It's like, no, say your stuff. Comment on this story. And then so how in depth was the critique,
Mhm.
and how diplomatic was the phrasing? And then that goes to me. At this point, even it's been in there for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. I've never really found much to do with it beyond that.
But just forcing them to do it probably helps.
Yeah, well, it helps me see,
Mhm.
and I get to see who are the problematic critiquers,
Mhm.
and then I can talk to them. Just usually I have an email, and it's uh, typically unique to them. I don't really have boilerplate emails I send out, and so I comment. I'll chat with them about it. And some people can't get it. Some people don't want to do that. They're in that camp of I want to tear people up to make me feel better, and they really don't last long in
Yeah.
critters.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've been in writers' workshops at Worldcon.
Mhm.
The one that really sticks in my mind was Philadelphia in 2001, where we had a neurodivergent young man submit a manuscript. And I have to say that the only nice thing I could say about it was that he spelled his name correctly, but since I'd never met him before, I couldn't even be sure of that. Um, and this kind of raw beginner really needs special handling. They may grow into become a fabulous writer, but they need a lot of massaging and hand holding along the way. Does Critters really have a way of dealing with that?
I think we do, but it was organic. It was not something I set up. It's something that happened because of the requirement to critique, and B, the requirement to be diplomatic,
Mm-hmm.
and really the urging to do in depth. I really stress that everyone should do in-depth critique. Look at every aspect of the story that you can think of, and we have
Mm-hmm.
guidelines and lists of things. So I think when people do that, I call it Critter's secret sauce, is
Yeah.
that doing critiques of others that are in depth, where you really analyze it and you phrase it nicely, well, diplomatically. It may not be nice, and maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
diplomatic. It's something that'll get past the lizard brain.
Mhm.
Um, Doing a lot of critiques, I think it's 50% is my guess of the value to someone improving their own writing. It's because then they start to see things that
Mhm.
they can't see in their own. And the key to that was Ed
Mm-hmm.
Bryant had written an article. It was called, I think it was Medicating the Blind Spot.
Mhm.
And that was his comment, was that there's things writers can't see in their own work that they can see in other people's. So the raw
Mm-hmm.
beginners, we get a lot of raw beginners, and they'll come in there and they'll send things up that are, easily rejected in the first paragraph if you were to submit them. But people will take time to go through them and point out what's working for them, what's not working for them, and they'll see that in the critiques of their work. But they also see in other people where they have to comment on every aspect of the story. That's where the 500 word to get full credit. Well, actually, it's 300 for full credit if you want, and 500 has been the average length of a critique, which is a pretty good amount of work, because that's an average. There's people who put in 1,000 or 2,000 words of critique, and the more you look at something in depth that somebody else wrote, the more you learn things about writing in general. It's kind of an organic teaching a method. It is kind of like a little class because you're doing this homework. I hate to call it homework, because it's not homework. It's you're learning to be a better writer by learning how people write.
And this is the reason why I have been sending all the new writers I get my hands on to Critters. I used to teach a writing workshop in Bethesda, Maryland, with the writers a writers group, and I only ever got, it seems to me, kids in high school who are planning to turn their D&D campaigns into novels, or retirees who are now finally they've been able to get out of being a federal bureaucrat, and they're going to knock Robert Heinlein off of his perch. And so these are the two classes of writers I had, and it was a workshop, so we would read each other's manuscripts. But I always told them, you can form your own groups, or you can go to Critters and find critiques. But the important thing is not that other people are reading your work, but that you are reading others with with the idea of writing a critique, because
Exactly.
it's a far more visible in Karen's manuscript than in mine. And when I read Karen's manuscript, I could see immediately, long list of dippy errors here. And then when you then go back and look at your own manuscript, oh my God, I just did exactly what I told Karen about.
It's kind of training your brain to
It
look for
is,
certain
and
things, and then you see it
better
in
over
own.
there in her manuscript than it in yours, because yours is completely veiled by you and your own ego. Clearly, I'm second only to Shakespeare and Milton. I don't have that feeling about Karen.
Yeah,
Exactly.
One of the things that I was a slush reader for the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Contest. And it was fascinating. And these are people who had managed to write an entire enormous manuscript, and they were actually really, really good, all of the manuscripts that I slushed. But I encountered one that I was not, because I had not read a lot of beginning work. I didn't know that this is a thing, but it's revenge porn. And I discovered that I also was writing it. Mine was much gentler than this person's, but basically somebody in your life has been horrible to you, and you do an entire work in which something horrible happens to them. And I'm now recognizing this as a very common thing with beginning writers, to the point that many magazine editors will actually say, do not send us revenge stories.
Well, I think what's
it
unique about
happens.
Critters is...
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I'm sorry. I think one thing unique about Critters is that everybody in there is a reader. And in a sense, everybody is equalized by being a reader. There's not necessarily better readers. We don't have competitions for who's the best reader. And there's no metric for, are you a really good reader of science fiction or what have you. It's you read what you like, and you like that. So everybody approaches Critters really primarily because of the diplomatic phrasing. They're steered toward approaching it as a reader, not approaching it as a writer. The fact that you're a writer, you certain things you know to comment on, and you know what it is when it says talk about the plot and talk about the characters and talk about the world building. You know what that means. But the fact that everyone is steered toward approaching it as a reader, everyone's really equalized, and that's the most important thing. I think you could take science fiction readers off the street, put them in and say, write a critique about this book or this story. Don't do it. Don't look at it as if you were a writer. Don't try to play a writer. Just say, what are your reactions as a reader? And you get the best feedback that way.
Absolutely.
So we don't really have a problem with novices coming in, and then they'll start seeing, well, my work is maybe fitting in these common categories, and I need to branch out and do things that aren't, type A that gets rejected and type B that gets rejected, because I see when I read things, that's not what I read. And then eventually I realize, well, maybe I should write something that's a little more unique and not these common tropes.
And that's what beta readers are essentially for. They're the first, you yourself, the writer, are the alpha reader, the alpha and the omega, the first and the last. But beta readers are essentially your who you're hoping to sell the book to. They are people who are hopefully not writers, who have never read your work before, and they just pick it up in Barnes and Noble or in a bookstore, and they open it and start reading. And that's what you're looking for when you're looking for a beta reader. And a lot of really new writers, they let their husband read it, or mom and dad.
My
sister.
mommy loved it.
Mommy loves it. Mom has always loved, but of course, mom would love everything you do. She loved your finger painting when you were in kindergarten. It is okay. It is good to find someone outside of your personal circle who adores you anyway, to look at it and find the things in your work that an ordinary regular person would see. And this is safe because it's not the reader at the Amazon contest. It's not the slush pile guy at Tor Books. You're not risking anything by running it through Critters. It's safe.
Mhm, exactly.
So I have to ask, where do your participants, where do the critters come from? Is it mostly based in Colorado, in the US?
Well, they were all over the world.
Yes.
And anybody can join from anywhere. It's the internet. Remember the old comment about on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. So I don't even know where people come from any given time, other than I can look at IP addresses or something, or people could tell me. But they're primarily US based. I think that's the bulk of it. But they could originally be anywhere in the world. I had to unfortunately limit EU participation and UK participation because they created this crazy data privacy law, the GDPR.
Oh, right.
And that put me personally, because I run this as me. It's not a profitable thing. If it's a money loser, it's people donate if they feel like it to keep the lights on, which is mostly running the network. But the penalties for the data privacy law in the EU and the UK are so severe, and people can report anything. So I couldn't risk that. So I had to unfortunately cut out people who are in the EU and the UK. But anywhere else in the world that doesn't have a draconian privacy law like that, where you can crush someone like me, is welcome to join. So they are all over the world.
Yeah. And the internet, of course, allows you to do this if you are living in a very, very rural area and there's no prayer of forming a writers group at your local Starbucks. This gives you a chance to get in there in a way that there's no other way.
Oh yeah. So definitely I can see there's people are all over the world. All 6 major continents are reflected.
I have to ask, going kind of in the other direction, does Critters have like in-person meetups like at the Colorado science fiction conventions, or maybe at Worldcon?
I've set some of those up occasionally, and we've had some over the years, but not regularly. No, Critters is really kept its focus on the critiquing. I've played over the years with setting up forums for people to go and chat, and sometimes they're popular, and sometimes no one uses them because they have all their own favorite forums elsewhere. So like right now, there really isn't one. There's one fellow trying to set one up on Facebook, and that's fine. But that's really not been Critter's focus. It's been very focused on the critiquing and how that process helps you improve as a writer. And there's a gazillion places where writers can go and talk.
Yeah.
I have to ask, Andrew, obviously you're administering this community. Do you also do some critiquing?
I do every now and then. Yeah. I've done less of it, but I've done, I don't know how many 1,000 critiques I've done in my life through that and through the local workshop. So yeah, occasionally I do some critiquing. But not as much. It's
and I have to ask, are you going to be at Worldcon in Seattle?
Yeah, no. Usually our travel plans turn out to conflict with Worldcons. And I don't set my travel plans around Worldcons. So I've gone to a few, and I enjoy them. But typically, unfortunately, I don't tend to make Worldcons. I usually try to make our local Mile High Con in Denver, and pretty regular at that one. But usually I'm retired now. We travel quite a bit, so my travel plans don't tend to mesh with Worldcons very well.
Well, yeah, don't you
I-
think he would it would be great to have a panel at Worldcon on this? If you can't do it in Seattle, consider the one in Oakland, California. The other idea is World Fantasy, which is also every other year in the US. So, it just sounds like the sort of thing that people would be interested in hearing about, right, Karen?
I would.
Yes, and I have to tell you something funny. I went on a big science fiction gathering. I've been going for the past couple of years, and everyone's sort of science fiction adjacent. And we had a thing where you could bring your first couple pages and read them one night in the bar. And people came, and there was the usual range of reading from good to bad. And a couple of these stories were exquisite. And I went up to folks and I said, gee, where are you published? And they said, oh, I've never, where would I submit this? And I just about fell over. And I was going to ask, does Critters have any adjacent like information databases? Do people often say in a critique, wow, this really sounds like an analog story. You ought to submit this to analog. Is there any sort of next step?
I think people individually will say that. We don't really have a structure for it. For quite a while, I was maintaining a database of editorial response times. Because
yeah.
people were like, "Oh my God,
Black hole,
I
was
haven't
that
heard from Gardner Dojois in 2 years," that kind of thing. Which
Was
you
that
won't
the
hear from him
black
now, I'll
hole?
tell you that. But yeah, that was the black holes, and
Yes,
that
yes,
was very
that was so
popular.
great.
Yeah, but these days people don't seem to track that as much. I don't get many data points in there, and it just if people don't post, it doesn't have any data.
That's because Duotrope
Submittable.
and
They do it better. Yeah,
the submission
right.
grinder, which is
Yes.
super data driven.
Exactly.
does
So
that.
that part's been, someone else is doing it better. If someone else can do a better mousetrap, then good on them. That's great. This isn't a profit center for me. If I'm not crushed if I lose, some visitors for any given part of it, because I'm basically doing it to help people. That's the whole purpose.
Yeah, which leads me to the beginning writer problem is you can't teach patience. You can only encourage it. Well, I've spent 10 years writing this book and no one will even look at it. Editors don't care if it took you 10 years, but they want to know how long is it going to take you to write the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Amazon and the whole self-publishing revolution has really kind of democratized that, because what used to be the big slush pile in every editorial has now become the Amazon self-publishing, basically slush pile. But it's a sort of meritocracy in a certain sense that everybody can put their work out there. They don't have to get one of n number of major editors to approve it. They can put it out there, and if nobody looks at it, nobody looks at it. They can try their own, get some marketing, get some eyeballs on it, and if it works, and you get a few cases. I don't know that that's really worse than the slush pile method. It's just a different way of getting work out there, and you really got both. You've got editors still, and people can submit and try to get
and at least beta reading it forces the quality up a little bit.
Yes.
I have self-published books that I save to show to conventions, and they're terrible. They are truly terrible, but some author believed in themselves. They paid to have it, printed and a cover and everything. I got these from the Philip K. Dick Award when I was a judge, and we got these things, and it was like, wow, bad. And what at least beta readers would point out things like the typo in the first page, that kind of thing, just minor stuff.
Oh yeah,
and it would help.
Yeah, critique helps with that too. People will comment on. It's not focused on typos and whatnot, but everybody will comment if you see a typo. They'll point it out.
Particularly if it's like major.
Yeah,
I recently edited a story that was written by an attorney, and it was a fine story. It had everything in terms of plot and character and dialogue, except he'd never learned how to use tags. So everything was said vehemently, barked angrily, and it just was clogged with this stuff. And because I was the editor, I removed it all. And I wrote the person a note and said, the generally accepted thing in publishing now is to say said. That's it. That's all you say is said. Sometimes you don't even need to see it. If you have two characters arguing and you keep attributing one of them, then it's clear the other one is the other character. And I said, but all this has to go away. And they let me do it. I mean, they didn't lose it, but I had actually never encountered that problem so consistently. And it was really interesting to me because the story was so good in every other way, but someone had obviously, some teacher must have taught this person that had to use that
in third grade.
Powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that when people read and they react as a reader, you know, I personally feel, et cetera, and they comment on things like that, then as the author, you get, you know, say our average is about 15 critiques per manuscript. So you get, you know, 15 plus or minus people telling you, and if a bunch of them mention and say, I prefer when people just say said, then you start seeing, well, readers seem to like it if I say said, as opposed to, you know, Tom Swifties all over the place.
Yeah. You know, academics
you actually
are the worst.
Yes, it is so true.
I have a cousin, PhD in English, and on his academic papers, he got paid by the word.
Oh my God.
And so, you know, why use one vibrant verb when you can put 15 adverbs in there and get paid more?
That's how Charles Dickens
Andrew,
went down the drain, you know, get paid by the word.
Yeah.
Andrew, you actually made a really good point when you said there are 15 critiques, and you notice a lot of people are saying, gee, I prefer it. And what that brings up is one of the great things about critique, where you can go into a critique group and have 6 people critique you, and 5 of them say, gee, I really liked this. I thought the ending was a little weak. We wanted to know what happened to Mrs. McGillicuddy. And then you have one person who just, this is wrong. And oh my God, why didn't you introduce, you know? And what's great about getting 6 critiques is you suddenly realize most people like it this way, and this person is nuts. And that's so helpful. I had that happen where I got a devastating critique of the premise of this story is completely wrong. No one like that would ever behave that way. And I had 5 other people say this was gorgeous. And I realized that my character was a particular kind of minority, and my critiquer had to be in their bonnet about that minority. And they just plugged it right in.
And if you have, you know, in the end, the goal of the exercise is to sell the work to readers. If majority opinion does have an effect, if everybody consistently says that a thing isn't working, you should listen. And but you know, you can still hang tough. You can say, I am Franz Kafka. He's going to turn into a cockroach. I don't care. You can do that. Right. But then you're going to accept that you're limiting your readership. And at least in the beginning, most writers do not want to do that.
When I started critiquing, I came from a background of being a book reviewer. And I was reviewing a lot of books, and they were all mysteries. And I basically raced through those books and wrote a review. And then when I started critiquing, I critiqued based on, did this thing entertain me enough to make me finish it? And my fellow critiquers were horrified because they'd say, well, on first read, this was really interesting. But then I went back and I began noticing all these problems. And I was like, you went back? Because the average reader doesn't go back. They rip through the thing at the airport. And I was reading is this a good airport read? And it took a while to kind of get me down to where I could look more deeply at structure.
But that's not a bad reaction, because frankly, if they're not impelled to read to the end, it doesn't matter. You know, you have to keep if you're the author, you're keeping all these balls in the air, and that's an important ball. There are books that I have read to page 300 and I realize nothing is ever going to happen. Do I have to do the next 500 pages? Maybe not, because it's impossible. So that's why you want many beta readers, is so that they can supply these different angles on the work that maybe you just had not considered.
Okay.
Mhm.
Our
And you get
fearless
different people.
leader has just reminded us that we are down to 5 minutes and
Hasn't
we
this-
need to start wrapping it up. So Andrew, you've talked a lot about critters, about critiquing. Are you writing?
I do some writing. I had a novel out last year, Termination of Species, and it's got a little AI component to it that I think is
Okay.
maybe prescient with where things are going. So yeah, cool.
Where
Yeah,
can we
where-
find this?
All your favorite, Amazons and so forth. You'll find it there. The usual places: ebook, paperback, hardback. It's
You
out
might
there in the
post
usual
a
places.
link, Andrew, to either the chat or to hand it to Bob or something so that
Yeah,
he can add it
Let
in.
me see if I let me see if I can
Okay.
find it while you
Okay.
post
And
that.
Brenda,
You look
you have
at,
a new book
let's
coming out next month.
Actually, I think it's in a couple weeks. Uh, uh, His Salakian Majesty Requests is an April book. I forget whether it's next week or the week after, but it should be out pretty soon. Sharks, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. Do you see
put
that? Breathtaking, right? But Phyl will tell you it's breathtaking.
I'll put a plug in for Reanimus Press as well. I founded Reanimus Press
Really?
15 years ago.
What does he do?
We mostly republish works that have gone out of print for professional authors. So we've got
Yeah, well, that's where
got a-
Bookview Cafe started.
Mhm.
Yeah,
with,
but
yeah,
with,
I know.
with
I was,
reprints, and then we
right.
right.
we
And
had
we do
favorite
some new
books.
ones. We
Yeah,
got
so-
like everything Damon Knight published, everything from about a quarter of Ben Bova's, everything from well, let's see, who else do we got? A bunch of Norman Spinrads. So got about 500 books that we've republished. They're all
Very
pro
good.
authors. So
I have put the link to the Amazon in the private chat, and I'm gonna and Bob, if Bob, could you throw it onto a public?
Yep.
Could you post it?
Yeah.
He'll figure out a way. I noticed that book has 5 stars on
Yay.
Amazon.
Very
Termination of
good.
Species.
yeah. It is. I'm reading a format review copy, and so I'm finding all these tiny errors, which, as an editor, I have trained myself to find. But this is one book where I have found I'm not reaching for a notepad to talk about these tiny little errors. I'm just reading it,
yeah,
and I'm
appreciate that.
thoroughly enjoying it.
Now
Oh,
this is you're
glad to
talking
hear.
about Andrew's book here.
No, I'm talking about yours.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
was
yeah. And Karen, what are you up to besides your?
I'm working on 2 books. One is putting out Patty 209, my dystopian
Right.
collection, and the other one is a collection of the home repair humor columns that I've been publishing for 20 years with a magazine in Seattle. I'm putting it out. It's called The Cat in the Ceiling and Other Disasters of Home
that
Ownership.
sounds like a bestseller.
Yeah.
And I think it is, and I'm actually selling it through hardware stores.
Very good.
And there's a special Seattle edition, which is all about Seattle disasters. And I'm really excited because the cartoonist who's been illustrating this for all these years did my cover, and he's really, really good.
Very,
Yeah,
very
yeah.
good.
And my one thing is, the Barefoot Sheriff, which I talked about last time, is now.
Which I have to post a review of it. It's
Thank
amazing.
Thank you. It's now wide. I don't even have any copies yet, but they're coming in the mail. And it is weird. It's different. It's totally different from anything else I've ever written. So if you enjoyed Weird West and book long puns, where it takes you a whole book to figure out the pun, then please, I hope your readers enjoy it. So, okay, Bobby,
Okay, what?
wrap it up.
Yeah, we're
Well, I did want to make a comment.
okay.
And Andrew, I'm not meaning to be harsh, but I hear people talking about the pride they take in boycotting Amazon. Like
Sure.
any action, I would consider, if you're going to boycott Amazon for corporate products.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because when you say I'm going to boycott Amazon, I have seen a lot of writers pointing out that their sales just went boom.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're small press or you're just publishing by yourself, self-published, and suddenly you are the market that controls 80% of the book sales, you're crushed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
it's a
so,
very, very tricky position to be in. But
Mm-hmm.
I
yeah,
publish widely. I mean, you can get my stuff everywhere that it's
yeah,
out there wide as well.
Um, for the
I
other writers out there, may I suggest Draft to Digital as a
Mm-hmm.
distributor?
Mm-hmm.
They will send it to every market imaginable.
That's what I use.
They do take a hunt, including Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But you can
include-
opt in or out
You
to
pick,
Amazon if you don't want to
you
do it
pick.
there.
Right. I generally opt out because I'm doing a lot of reprints, and Amazon gets real sticky about getting reprints from other distributors. So I upload to them individually. But
Mhm.
I mean, if you don't want to buy from Amazon, because as Andrew says, there's a lot of people slamming AI into there,
Mhm.
and Amazon, from the upload perspective, I know Amazon's got a fairly aggressive AI policy, but just remember that you're not going to go to hell if you buy a independent contributor's book on Amazon. Is not necessarily a bad thing, because not everything is available on all of the markets.
mhm.
And it's pretty easy to do. I mean, if you're self-publishing right now, as you say, Draft to Digital is the easy place to go, and they'll get
Yep.
it out there everywhere. You can get it out there in ebook, you can get it out there in print, and it costs nothing up front. So I definitely I use that. I upload direct to Amazon because you get all the revenue that way, and it's easy. It's the biggest market. But use Draft to Digital for everything else, and that's for Reanimus as well. That's how we get our ebooks out there as well. And you can, yeah, don't feel you
Yeah,
have to go to Amazon. You can get things elsewhere. I did post in the comments a link to Reanimus Press. People are interested in checking that out, and my own website, aburt.com, aburt.com. If you want to
yeah.
find my book not on Amazon, there's a link there to find it not on Amazon.
Excellent.
Well, and that's just a point I wanted to make, that uh, the small press percentage of Amazon's market is about somewhere in the neighborhood of 1%, and you're not making a break in Amazon, and you're not hurting them near as bad as you're hurting that individual press. But I will tell you why I wasn't paying much attention to the talk today. I was over on Andrew's website reading some of the links that he has while we were talking. It was just, there's some brilliant stuff there. The diplomatic critique, you
Yes.
know, that
Mhm.
that was wonderful. I
Yep.
mean, even if the stupid bastards can't use spell check, now I won't tell them they're a stupid bastard.
Yeah.
Oh, smile.
And then they will
Karen
hear
knows.
you. Yes.
Phil, I mean, all of you guys are, at least Karen and um, Phyl, have been through my publishing process, and I try to practice diplomacy in the rejections.
He's better than I am.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little different. It is different
Yeah,
as an editor, because as an editor, you do have power over the author of
Yeah.
accepting or rejecting. In critiquing, you have no power over another author. You are equals. You are peers in the critiquing workshop process. So you should never assume a power you don't have.
but if
But
you have
editors
that
have power.
power,
Yeah,
you've
editors have
got
power.
to exercise it
Wisely.
responsibly.
Yeah, I find that I want to write for my audience. I want them to hear what I'm saying. I want to communicate. If I just want to write a rant, I'll write a rant. But if I want someone to understand and actually hear what I'm saying and maybe persuade them to, if I'm trying to persuade them, then I want to write it in a way they'll hear it and slip past that lizard brain to their rational side. And the phrasing really has a lot to do with that. Write for your audience is always true.
Mhm.
Well, I can just tell you that I ran a writer's critique group for almost 20 years before I started editing.
Mhm.
And your points were extremely well made. That what you say and how you say it are often two different things. And if you really want to get the point across, you're going to pay attention to it. And I like some of your examples. So anybody who's running a critique group, I would urge them to go to Critter and look at it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I've been sending young writers there for years because that's always the first thing you do after you finish writing your super, Lord of the Rings style epic. What should I do with this? Should I send it to Tor Books right now? No, darling, no. Send it to a beta reader first and whip it into shape because, Tom Doherty doesn't want to see it in its raw form.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you've got some good stuff. And now I think I should. Now, who would I be doing this for? Is it Liam that compared me to Carol Burnett?
Yeah. So we need to say goodbye.
Yes.
Thanks so much for having me. I
It is
appreciate
so
it.
great.
Oh,
Enjoyed
thank
it.
you,
Really,
Andrew.
really
This
Lots
has
of
been
enjoyed it.
it.
great.
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, I thought you guys. I very much appreciate you coming, Andrew. It was
No, thanks for having
you
me.
run a fine looking website and has lots of good content. And obviously, Brenda, you're doing a lot of young writers favors by sending them there.
It
And
is, I don't know anything quite like this in the industry. I don't know whether Critters is the only one like this. There's no close analog that I have heard of. So you're the only one, Andrew.
Well, yeah, and it may be the lack of a profit motive
Oh,
involved.
yeah, there you
Everyone else
go.
is doing something for a profit, and I'm not
Yes.
doing that.
Yeah.
So
And
someone asked
and
about
if you're
Blue
a young
Moon.
writer, the number of people who say, well, should I get a marketing person? Do things that are free first, honey, because you have plenty of opportunity to blow your money later.
The person who asked
Yeah.
about Blue
And
Moon,
people
yes,
want to
you're
know if they
right.
should get an agent before they start writing.
That's
Yes.
later.
Yes.
okay,
But,
so
well,
I'm
Yeah.
gonna
Andrew
I'm gonna
first.
I'm gonna close this out.
Yes.